Thank you, and thank all of you for the public service that you're performing by the time and effort you've put in here today. I'm going to use my time this morning to talk about my motivations for being here. I hope that at this point you have a pretty good idea of what my background and professional qualifications are. You've seen my writing samples, you know what my approach to analyzing and writing about the law is. And all those things go to competence. And competence is important, but I would suggest to you for a job like this, it is necessary but not sufficient. For a famously busy court like this, someone also needs the right motivation, the right drive inside to perform public service in order to keep them coming back and showing up and doing the work every day. And so in talking about my motivation, I'm going to start with the influences of my childhood that shaped who I am today. The two greatest influences on my life growing up were my grandfather and my mother. My grandfather was a career Marine Corps veteran. He enlisted at the start of the Second World War and received a field commission and led a platoon up the beaches at Tinian, Tarawa, and Saipan. He was wounded twice, earned just about every commendation for bravery there was, and then remarkably after the war, he stayed in and dedicated his entire professional life to serving our country in the service, rising not only to be a general, but the Chief of Staff of the United States Marine Corps. And he did that because he had the right internal motivation, because he believed in the mission of protecting our country and his children and his grandchildren growing up into a world where they could be safe and free. My mother was remarkable in her own way and also manifested a service orientation. My mom was faced with the difficult task halfway through life of starting over with a new profession and sole responsibility for a child. And I watched her as I was growing up perform the twin miracles of building a successful legal practice while simultaneously raising me on her own. And it really wasn't until I became both a lawyer and a parent that I gained an appreciation for what a remarkable achievement that was. And I'm almost tempted to say I don't know how she did it, but in a sense I do because I know who she is. And she also has that service orientation, which is manifested differently. In her, it manifested in service to her family law clients who she cared deeply about, and of course service to her family and to her son. And that's how she was able to work the long hours, doing everything she needed to provide for me, put me to bed, and then stay up hours later at the kitchen table working on briefs for her clients because she believed in service. And so with those twin influences in my life, it's not surprising that as I came to adulthood, that the question that I asked myself and that I've been continuing to ask myself ever since is where can I best serve? And with my mom as an example and having learned about the impact that the law can have on people's lives from hearing her stories growing up, I naturally eventually came back to the law after trying a couple of other things. And so I found myself walking onto the University of Iowa campus like so many law students with a vague idea that I wanted to make a difference in the world and that a law degree was going to let me do that. And little suspecting that I was about to fall in love 3 times. I was about to fall in love with my wife, Jessica, my now wife, Jessica, who was another student there at the time and has since become a brilliant and successful attorney in her own right and an equally brilliant wife and mother who inspires me every day. I fell in love with the state where she was born and raised and where we chose to raise our own family. And I fell in love with the law. As a law student, as all of you who are lawyers know, the main part of what you do as a law student is read appellate decisions and think about them and write about them. That's how we learn what the law is. And unlike a lot of people, some of whom view law school as kind of a hazing ritual that you have to get through and then best forgotten, I actually kind of loved it because these opinions are such remarkable historical and social documents where It brings together these high ideas of what the law is, what justice is supposed to be, and makes them concrete in specific cases with specific facts. And judges have to do the work of merging this world of ideas of what the law is with the facts of people, real human beings, flesh and blood, coming to the court system for justice. And as I was reading this, I had this epiphany, long hours in the night at the Boyd Law Building. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the person writing these opinions. This is a way for someone like me, a nerd who would read and write all day if left to his own devices. This is a way I can use that passion and that interest to actually affect people's lives. And so from that point on, I knew in the end I wanted to be a judge. But I also knew I needed to obtain other experiences in order to qualify myself for that role. And so I went out into the world and I served in a variety of capacity. I served private clients for 5 years. I served our state in the Iowa Attorney General's office under 2 different administrations. I served in the United States Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office under 2 different administrations. And I, of course, served in the Iowa Army National Guard, where I got to serve both my state and my country, and in a small way follow in my grandfather's footsteps in our nation's armed forces. And then last year, of course, I had the opportunity to start what for me was the ultimate service, serving as a judge. And I want to make one thing absolutely clear. Don't be confused by the fact I'm sitting in front of you today. I love being a district court judge, and I'm very happy on the district court bench. I get to do important and meaningful work, and I have some of the best colleagues in the world out there, people who have become my friends and mentors and who have been extremely generous with their time and energy. So I'm not here because I'm happy, but I'm here because of the answer to the question that I've been asking myself all of these years about where can I serve best. And as someone who fell in love reading appellate opinions and who is happiest and I think best when researching and writing opinions, for me personally, I think the appellate court makes sense as my long-term destination. And while I might have wished to wait until a later stage of my career, I know that these opportunities come rarely. And I felt that if this is something that I ever wanted to do, then I needed to take the opportunity while the opportunity existed. So that's why I'm here, and bringing it back to where I started, because I come to you with that service motivation. I would submit that you can trust me to continue to ask that question I've been asking myself my entire career of how can I best serve? And that's what's going to make me show up every day to do the difficult work of this court. And I hope you will give me the opportunity to prove it. With that, I welcome your questions, and thank you.
We'll start with Commissioner Picklett.
Thank you. Thanks, Judge. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your application. Take a few minutes and highlight. Looks like you have some private practice litigation experience, specifically between 2009 and 2014. Can you take some time and highlight the litigation you did, the number of trials you had, and maybe just overall the breadth of work you completed there?
Sure. So I worked at a large law firm in Minneapolis where I started my career working on transactional documents as a contract attorney working primarily on financial contracts, which required reading through and analyzing really dense agreements between usually major banking associations. And so it got me really good at learning to focus on the text of what I was reading and interpret the meaning of it. And then, though I feel that's a valuable experience, I ultimately wanted to get litigation experience, and so that's why I made the change to the trial group at Dorsey & Whitney. And at Dorsey, again, because it's a big firm, it's mostly commercial litigation. It's lawsuits between big companies fighting over contracts, antitrust, securities. And so I got a lot of experience with the discovery process, with really difficult facts, complicated subject matter with lots of experts. As an associate, I typically was not lead counsel, but I got to be associated with a number of trials where I had to work with experts and with other witnesses in preparing them and in going through really dense materials in order to make it digestible for not only the witnesses and senior attorneys, but hopefully for the judges and juries. And so I felt that that was a valuable experience that has helped me now that I've become a judge in digesting the difficult factual information, especially in civil disputes, where you get into cases where applying the facts are as or more difficult than applying the law.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stanger.
Good morning, Judge or Major. We have both in common, so I just wanted to be sure to thank you for your service and be sure to thank you for applying today. It's great to have another veteran looking at continuing his service in this capacity, and thank you for that. My question really stems from kind of a diversity category, and that is the current Court of Appeals with Judge Bauer retiring will now have less folks on the bench with trial experience than those that have that trial experience. And particularly, we will also have, if you're appointed, a lot of experience from the Attorney General's office. Could you, I guess, maybe address that as a concern and maybe share with what sort of diversity you would bring to the bench?
Sure. Well, one form of diversity you hit at right at the outset. As far as I'm aware, none of the current members of the Court of Appeals are veterans. And I do believe that having that military experience is valuable, especially on a multi-member court, because there's no institution in our society, as you know, that does a better job of bringing people together from different backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds, and telling them you have a common mission and you have to find a way to work together successfully. And so having that experience of working together in units as part of teams from people from all sorts of backgrounds, I think, is going to be extremely valuable. And that military experience is a form of diversity that I think is valuable to bring on the bench. As to your second question, I do think it's valuable to have experience as a district court judge. Obviously, I have not been a district court judge for very long, but out in 5A, being a rural district, the experience is very intensive, and you get exposed to everything at once. You know, out there, we're not assigned to a particular docket for a year. If you're assigned to a courthouse, we do it on a quarterly rotation. Typically, you're the only district court judge assigned there. Like, I'm currently in Marion County. I'm the only district court judge assigned to Marion County, which means everything that's filed in Marion County, doesn't matter if it's criminal, probate, family, you name it, everything comes to me. And so I have had to give myself the ultimate crash course in all of the areas of law that I didn't previously have as much personal familiarity with. And I found that experience to be extremely valuable. And I think being out in a rural district is valuable because you sometimes get kinds of disputes that you aren't going to get in Des Moines. My last major civil trial involved a dispute over cattle grazing rights. You're probably not going to get that down the street. And so I think having that experience of district court judging, and especially from a rural district, is a valuable form of diversity to bring on the bench.
Thanks so much, Judge.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoig.
Hi, Judge. Thank you for applying.
Thank you.
So kind of a spin-off of hers, you kind of have touched on how you would probably be a good asset or teammate just because of your own experiences. But since you're working so closely, what would you do in a scenario where maybe you and another judge's opinions are different on a case?
So I see that as a two-step process. The first step is trying to find if there's a way that we can decide the case on something that we can agree on. I think oftentimes cases can and should be decided on narrow grounds, and if you can focus in on the narrow grounds that are applicable, you can come to a consensus. If that's impossible, if you get to a fundamental disagreement on an issue that you have to decide for that particular case, then I think you articulate your position as well as you can, and then if you're in the minority, you write your dissent to create a record of what you said, but then you move on, and you don't allow it to sour your relationship with your colleagues. That's another thing you learn in the military. As a staff officer, I'm advising commanders, but it's ultimately up to the commanders what to do. And so I've had occasions where I've given advice and someone's decided to go a different direction, and you just have to say, I understand, and move on. And that's what I would do on the court.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spies.
Good morning, Judge.
Good morning.
As we contemplate the attributes that make for a good appellate judge, intellectual curiosity, persistence, discipline, one question that's come up this morning is the role of empathy on the appellate bench. Could you let us know your thoughts about that?
Yes, I think it is important, not because you should render legally incorrect opinion out of sympathy, but I think because empathy sometimes can help you interpret facts, especially when there's a subjective element to the facts, such as when people are suffering from injuries, maybe some of which are psychological, and you're having to assess those claims. And I think having faced some adversity in my life, having been a child of divorce, I don't have a statistical survey of this, but anecdotally, in talking to other judges around the state, I don't think there are very many who were themselves children of divorce, which is interesting when you consider that judges are then called upon to decide the fate of thousands of children who are going through divorce. And so I think as someone who has been on the other side of that and understand very personally the profound impact those decisions make, that's what's going to keep me motivated and do everything in my power to make sure that we're doing the right thing. It doesn't guarantee that I'll get it right, but it guarantees that I'll go in and I'll do the work because I have that empathy and I know the real impact that it has on people's lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hartcott.
Judge Faith, good morning. You wrote that you almost became a professional historian. Can you talk about how your knowledge of history enhances your ability to serve as a trial court judge and potentially a judge on the Court of Appeals?
Sure. Yes, so like I said, it wasn't a straight line path to the law for me. I tried a couple of other things. I've always had a love for history, and so after my undergraduate degree, I pursued a graduate program in history at Syracuse University, where I was researching and teaching history, largely focused on diplomatic history of the United States, which is not immediately applicable, but the methods that you learn of researching history and thinking about it and examining primary source documents, I think could potentially be valuable if you get into a case where, and you've got to get several steps deep into a case where you get here, but if there's no binding precedent, if the law itself is in some way ambiguous, then I think you arrive at a step where you're trying to interpret ambiguous language, and one thing you look at is the history, the context of what was going on when this law was written, which informs what the words would have reasonably been understood to mean by the people who agreed to those words at the time. And so I think being an almost historian gives me a leg up in doing that work of historical analysis if and when I'm called upon to do so on the bench.
Commissioner Samurath.
You mentioned that you've been on the district court bench since last year. Can you give us some idea? You also mentioned Marion County. I'm just trying to get an idea of the scope of what you've done on the district court bench since your appointment, and when exactly was that happened?
Sure. It was last fall. I actually started in October. For my first two rotations, was out in Dallas County and then Marion County, but we also fill in for each other. So I've been out, I think at this point, to each of the 6 counties within 5A, as well as a number of 5B counties where we fill in from time to time. And like I said, it's everything. I've had, of course, family law is probably the single biggest thing on your docket as a district court judge, followed closely by criminal law. And so those two would be what I've gotten the most experience in, including, I'd say, at least a dozen family law bench trials, 4 criminal jury trials, and a couple of other civil trials that were unrelated to family. So it's been a good variety. Also, a lot of probates. Usually those don't go to trial, but I've had to give myself a crash course in how probate law works, which is something I had no previous background in, and so that's been a fascinating exploration. So really, anything and everything, all of the time. I think that's the motto of the rural court judge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our time is up. So thank you for your application. Thank you for your service, and we wish you the best.
Thank you.